In terms of how I would talk about being an effective CEO to our students, it's really from a player-coach mentality, where you need to be able to do both. You need to be able to do the work, understand what needs to be done in the company, but then not do the work, and step back and guide the team, understand what good looks like, where the team needs to get to, put the right people in place, and then manage the company, manage the teams, manage the individuals to collective success.
And this is Scaling Clean, the podcast for clean economy CEOs, investors, and the people who advise them. I'm your host, Mike Casey. My day job is running TigerCom, a firm that counsels companies that are helping move the U.S. economy onto a more sustainable footing. I get to meet the people who are succeeding at building, funding, or advising the most successful companies in your sectors. So each show, we try to bring you usable insights from these leaders so you can apply them to the business of running your business. Hey, Clean Techers, Scaling Clean listeners know we seek out clean economy CEOs for their lessons on building teams and running companies. All our guests to date have developed their leadership abilities by ascending a career ladder, and they've often done that across several companies. My guest today has instead learned his leadership lessons on the job, so to speak. Jesse Grossman founded Soltage 17 years ago, and he's led the company ever since as chairman and CEO. Soltage is a New Jersey-based utility-scale solar IPP company that was founded on the belief that capital costs should not stop the spread of solar. And I actually met Jesse several years ago through the sponsor of this episode, Clean Tech Leaders Roundtable, and it's great to connect with him today. Jesse, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Mike. Great to be here.
Okay, let's start with your background. You have, I think it's safe to say, a unique background for clean tech CEOs. Tell me and our listeners about yours.
Yeah, happy to. And I think like most folks that have been in this industry for a while, and I got into this industry in 2005, 2006, prior to that, there really was not a clean tech industry. There was not a renewables industry that was as broad and as expansive as it is now. And so, like most other folks in this space, I had a past life, and my past life really has informed what I'm doing currently, and the why of why I'm doing it currently. I was a tropical rainforest ecologist for many years. I studied science. I realized I liked being outside and setting up good scientific questions that would lead to, ideally, good science projects that would influence conservation and sustainability outcomes. So I spent a lot of time in the U.S., getting good training, and then overseas, East Africa for many years, Southeast Asia for many years, running large landscape level ecological surveys, largely looking for justification of why rainforest should be kept in place based on the megafauna that was inside of it, or rare and endangered species. And that, I have to say, was a really nice time of life, and a very useful bit of work that appreciated doing at the time. However, after a couple of years of doing this, I started to see some patterns emerge, and those patterns were very negative to all of the sustainability and conservation features of the world that I was keen to work on and work in for the long term. I would be doing a project in Africa, in a relatively untouched virgin rainforest, host to a number of large animals, and then 2 years later would understand that a business interest wanted to harvest the timber from that, and unsustainably that forest was cut down and clear cut. I was working in Southeast Asia on some coral reefs, and looking to justify a marine park getting set up, and that was entirely derailed because there were some offshore natural gas deposits that were found that were then given into a concession to be mined. So I saw this happening, and I said to myself, I'm a fairly pragmatic person. I'm going to be very frustrated if I'm from an NGO perspective, from a nonprofit perspective, or government aid organization perspective, wagging my fingers at governments and big business interests, saying, do not do that. That is wrong based on the science. I said to myself, that's not going to be a winning game, and I will be somewhat depressed if I keep doing that my entire life. So I need to, see what is, what is the difference maker in these equations, and it was the businesses that were coming in, and I need to figure out how to capture the ability, strength, power, determinism of a business and harness it for the sustainability objectives that I hold so true to my heart. And so that was really the transition where I said to apply to some good grad schools to the analytical side of and how to run teams. I had sort of and raised money to some extent. I had picked up in my past career, but I needed to speak the business language. Went to a great set of grad programs at Yale, and there's others in Duke and Michigan that have similar programs focused on the cross link of sustainability and business, and then started Soltage there. So that was the decision to found Soltage. Why that made sense at the time, it's clear that solar and renewable energy technology made sense. But at the time, back in 2005, the opportunity was not ready to be picked up by the broader market in a manner that would push it forward at scale or speed. And that was due to a couple of things. Capital was really mispricing the assets, solar energy technology. Regulatory risk was seen as a much larger risk than it ended up being, simply because the regulatory markets hadn't been working for a long period of time. There were questions about contracting risk. Are customers going to pay for that? And then it was very clear that as a capital-intensive asset, the owners themselves were not well set up to be the operators. Where you are in the business of running a big factory and making widgets. If someone says, "Well, why don't you put a big solar asset, on your roof or adjacent to your land?" You've got to come up with capital for that. You've got to come up with the operational protocols for that. That didn't make any sense for that owner, and they probably were not going to do renewable energy at scale. So really, it was clear that a business platform needed to be created that would take on all of those roles and simply deliver to the client the commodity needed, which is the kilowatt hours. There was a good history of IPPs in the U.S., and it seemed that the time was right to create an IPP for solar energy provision.
Starting a company is a pretty gutsy thing to do, particularly when the technology you're going to base your company on is at such an early stage as solar was 20 years ago. You were articulate about what catalyzed your decision to found Soltage, but were lessons that you learned in the rainforest, were they applicable to running a company? And if so, what were they and how did they apply?
Yeah, that's a great question. The answer is yes. One of the great joys about life is that you're always learning, and I think many of us are always kind of creating threads based on past experiences and bringing those to bear into current challenges, current problems, current opportunities. Working in the rainforest, you're often far from resources, bringing together teams, and so you are needing to set direction. You are needing to focus your team. You are needing to clearly communicate the goals of what you need to do, and pull everybody together to achieve the same outcomes. Oftentimes, where you've got really disparate disciplines working together. You've got somebody cutting the trail. You've got somebody back at camp doing logistics and cooking. You got various people taking different pieces of scientific data. If you think about it, it's not that different from a company. With many different sort of departments that need to work seamlessly together. And then from a logistics perspective, you need to have raised the capital and gotten the buy-in from whatever funding source you have, which could be equivalent to a board. So I would say yes, Mike, absolutely.
Jesse, look back at your career. Who were the most important mentors, and what did you learn from them?
Well, Mike, I was really fortunate to start the business with my co-founders at Yale, and at that school, as you can imagine, the professors there have are great thinkers and are really looking to equip the next generation of doers with their skills and knowledge. First one I would call out was a professor there named Bill Ellis, a former lecturer, and also the former CEO of Northeastern Utilities. And from this gentleman, I learned really how a utility company CEO thinks about providing services, reliability to a distributed network of power purchasers. The second was also a professor up there. Her name was Marian Chertow. She was a real early innovator in ecological and economic systems thinking, and also had practical experience at setting up waste energy companies. So from her, I was able to get many themes of entrepreneurship, early capital raising, and just the nuts and bolts of setting up a business that has many moving parts and complexity in terms of energy provision services. Finally, I would call out David Cromwell, and he was the professor at business school where this class was actually where Soltage was founded. He was a Wall Street scion for 30 years of a career prior to being a professor, running private equity and venture capital. So he had analyzed tens of thousands of businesses, and he and his team had invested in thousands of businesses, many billions of dollars. And to have him and his co-teacher Maureen looking over me and my team's shoulders as we were doing initial customer sourcing, business plan analysis, financial modeling, total addressable market scope, those sort of things, came second nature to him, and the observations and thoughts were invaluable.
Wow, what a slingshot. That's I think a lot of people listening to this will be retroactively jealous of you. All right. You and I met through Clean Tech Leaders Roundtable. I know that you're up there in the New York City area, so presumably you've had the opportunity to compare notes with other CEOs, people who've been more traditionally tracked to a CEO job where they're coming up in finance and they're getting ascending jobs and they're working across companies. When you compare notes with those people, with what your experience has been like, where you've been the CEO from the start of one company for almost 2 decades, what have you observed your experience differing from their experiences?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, and we do try to get together in terms of others, C-level folks running businesses either in same industry and separate industries, and compare notes frequently, because that's one of the important things about staying fresh, staying agile, staying innovative in this space. So, but I have to say, talking with other CEOs, what very quickly emerges is that everyone has had very different experiences and paths getting to where they are. And there are very few molds or modalities that lead one to the title of CEO, for whatever that means, short of starting your own company. There are a number of points that are consistent. Most other successful CEOs that I talk with, they're serious subject matter experts. They have a passion for learning. They have broad interests and experiences. And that all translates into an ability to be a good CEO. From my perspective, yes, there was a significant level of difficulty and challenge into growing into this role, but it has not been the same role for the last 17 years, as you can imagine.
Interesting point. Yeah,
as you can imagine, being a CEO of a venture capital backed company is very different from being a CEO of a private equity backed company, which is very different from being a CEO of an institutionally funded company. And there's different stages, there's different roles that have evolved, and different challenges and growth points that have had to be overcome as we've moved through the business life cycle over the last 17 years.
Okay, I know that's a very deep well we could climb down into, but I got to tell you, I can't jump over that delicious distinction you just pulled out. How would you summarize for our listeners, what is the difference in being a CEO of a venture-backed company versus a PE-backed company to one that is now stood up on its own and is maturing. How would you just table those differences?
Yeah. Well, Mike, I'll start by saying that one of my mentors who we didn't talk to said that if you are fortunate enough to have a job for over 10 years, you're able to really do a lot in that position. So being 17 years in on this position, I feel very fortunate with what we've been able to grow and how personally I've been able to grow and learn and transition as this company has transitioned through these stages. And it certainly hasn't been alone. It's been with an excellent and evolving set of colleagues and investors that have been along on this ride with us. Now, looking backwards over 17 years, and the different stages that we have gone through, capital based, private equity based, now institutionally funded. It has been, I would say, a challenge of navigating an industry that continues to mature, where from early stages to the late stages, opportunities being unclear, opaque, small, hard to capture, risks being numerous, to risks being understood, mitigated, as this industry has gotten more and more mature. I think the traditional rubric of investment makes sense here. Venture capital, you are working in a market where revenues are not particularly clear, business plan is still coming together, customers are not known and difficult to find, and that was an interesting stage of the market, and certainly an interesting stage of Soltage when we were navigating through the few solar markets that were available in the U.S. and the changing regulatory landscape, convincing investors that this was a good place to put increasingly mature capital, and then executing on that with customers and creating an initial base of revenue for the company. Moving into the private equity phase, where you're a bigger company, you're funded, you've got revenues coming in, but there's still significant risks ahead. Perhaps not so much in the broader market scheme, but in terms of how the business can scale. That brings its own set of risks in terms of which markets are being selected, how much capital is being allocated to each one of those markets. Gets more into organizational construct in terms of how you're setting up your company with the various divisions and roles, responsibilities, delegated authority there. There you're getting to a stage where, as a leader, you are not able to, run the entire company or do all of the work. And so you really need to make sure you've got excellent colleagues, ideally folks smarter than you and trained in different areas than you're trained, on board to navigate and continue to grow through that. And then getting to a mature stage of a company, there you've got, you've been, either sort of ported into a market or you've been working in a market long enough where the total addressable market is somewhat scoped out, where that market is going is also scoped out. The opportunities are more established, and at that point, it's about can you efficiently run a larger company and have the right people in, have the right culture created, have the right institutional investment dollars going into opportunities on a consistent basis. And all of those have had their challenges and real opportunities. I think that drives home a number of things that I try to keep fresh about myself and sort of personal goals that I have to always be learning, always be in a space where there's growth, and that has and always be working with real high caliber people in the company, as customers and as investors, and that has continued every single day that I wake up, and I feel very grateful for that.
Good. Okay, you quit your job tomorrow, you go back to Yale, and you are a guest lecturer at the business school. Your first lecture is sharing with your students what the role of the effective CEO is. What's the guts of that lecture?
Yeah, Mike, thanks for going there. I do love teaching. I've got some friends and colleagues who are professors at Columbia and Yale, and they regularly pull me back to give guest lectures, with on classes that I wish were taught when I was at school. And so I hope to do that at some point someday. In terms of how I would talk about being an effective CEO to our students, it's really from a player coach mentality, where you need to be able to do both. You need to be able to do the work, understand what needs to be done in the company, but then not do the work, and step back and guide the team, understand what good looks like, where the team needs to get to, put the right people in place, and then manage the company, manage the teams, manage the individuals to collective success. So with that, you need to understand all parts of the business. You need to set the goals and then watch the team do the work. There's a real discrete focus on where are the problems coming from, who are the people that are in the various seats, and then what's coming down the pike from the future. Being able to keep your head above the fray and understand how to innovate and keep the business relevant, keep addressing the markets and customers coming in the future. The CEO needs to be pushing the company, needs to be pushing the pipeline of business, needs to be pushing the internal knowledge base to get to where the market is going, ideally before everybody else gets there. So big points are communication internally and externally. That's not only being a mouthpiece, but having 2 ears and listening to the great people that are working with you and that are present in the space. It's being able to convey ideas and story tell a bit. And then it's about establishing consensus and buy-in. That needs to happen on a daily basis, with your team, with your partners, with your board, with your investors, with your customers. It's constantly about creating the win-win situations, which, thank goodness, in a growth space like renewable energy, this is not a zero-sum game.
Yeah,
and so it makes it much
sure.
easier to establish consensus and buy-in, even with folks that otherwise might be competitors.
For sure. One of those students after your first lecture comes up to you and says, Professor Grossman, would you advise me to work up a corporate ladder, then be a CEO? Or should I leave school and try to start my own company, then I'll ride as CEO for 17 years like you? Looking back, which would you advise them to do?
Well, I'll give you an answer, but I think it'll reveal a bit of my science bias here. So I would counsel that student that the numbers are not with you. Just being frank, startup CEOs, the numbers do not look great in terms of coming out on the other side with an exit or running a mature business. But all that being said, that's absolute right time to be doing this, out of undergrad or out of grad school. And the knowledge and skills that you will get by really jumping into the problem set of business creation with both feet are invaluable, and skills that you'll take into other walks of your life as well. This is a good time to take advantage of the risk tolerance that one typically has coming out of grad school or undergrad. And this is a time, where if you think you've got an idea, give it a shot before, you've got other, frankly needs, needs, on your time from family, needs on having a stable revenue stream, because that's typically not guaranteed up front. I do, sit back and tell people, really think carefully though, before you do this, about your business model, and start with your work from a scientific hypothesis perspective. So line up your business idea and then try, both with yourself as well as with trusted friends, colleagues, and mentors, and ideally experts in your field, to convince yourself that you should not do that. Try to disprove your hypothesis that you should do that. And if you can't do that,
that's interesting. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and then if you can't do that, give it a shot. And if you're doing it, really jump in with both feet and try to make it a success.
Broadly speaking, hiring is always cited as one of the most challenging parts of leading companies. What have you learned about making new hires?
That is a great question. Hiring is so important to the business, maybe the most important part of the business. First off, you need to have a really clear idea of what the role is, particularly in important positions, mid-level or senior level positions where you don't have internal candidates who you know. Having a clear idea of what the role is will allow for you to either to put together your position description and or recruit. Understand that you need to get ahead of this, look at a forward org chart, understand what positions are needed and what you're going to be filling into a couple of quarters ahead. And just be very realistic with yourself that all hiring, if you're doing it right, will typically take longer and be more expensive than you had anticipated.
Do you have a go-to interview question? And if so, what is it and what does it tell you?
I really like to throw people off the questions that they have prepped for. And that is one of the most important things that I try to do in terms of interviewing people, because I want to know who people really are. So I like to see how people have responded to challenges and problems that they've had in their past careers, in their past positions, in their life. I really want to be specific with folks about what in their past accomplishments they have taken ownership over. What have you actually done there? It's very easy to speak generally about, I was on a team and we accomplished X, Y, and Z. What did you do? How did you do it? What support did you have? And what did you own out of that? And then I also like to get people talking about their extracurricular activities, just what sort of hobbies they have, what sort of foods they like to cook. This is, again, getting people off of the questions that they had probably prepped for, and understanding, what kind of a person is this? Somebody coming into the team needs to not only be able to technically do the job, but there's a real fit component that needs to be there if you're looking to keep your culture strong.
What's the guidance you'd offer on firing people?
That is the flip side of the coin, and that's an unfortunate reality of running a business. So the first is not to shy away from it. You need to start off by hiring the right people and training them up. You need to give people that you had hired all of the right tools and access to be successful. But if you see that someone isn't working out, don't wait too long. I think humans have an unconscious bias that allows for us to justify keeping folks that are operating suboptimal. But in reality, someone operating at 70 or 80% of what a position could be really hurts all of the folks involved. It hurts the employee because they're not getting the feedback that they need to pivot to a different company, pivot to a different career, innovate or work differently to be long-term employed. It harms the company as initiatives are not pushed forward at the speed that they need to. And then it harms the culture of the institution if folks are kept along for the ride that are not traveling in sync with the other employees.
One of the most interesting questions we've recently started asking guests is what habits or practices they use to stay on top of their game. And I've heard everything from attending opera to weekend hiking to getting up at 5 a.m. What's the set of hacks that Jesse Grossman has found that keeps him on his A game at work?
Well, Mike, I would love to have a day that starts with getting up at 5 a.m. and then doing some hiking and then attending opera. So I think
I don't want to represent those all were in the same human. That's each one of those is a practice from a separate human, just so you're clear.
Very good. Understood. So I think it's critically important to keep your body and your mind in a healthy place in a sustainable way. And at least for myself, that's been critical. This is a marathon. It's not a sprint. And that is a very important mindset. Sometimes you're sprinting to against a deadline or a deal that needs to close or something like that. But if that's how you're running yourself, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, that's not going to be sustainable. So it's the simple things, getting enough sleep, paying attention to your body, be it yoga, exercise, meditation. Those all need to be sort of core parts of of the lifestyle that are somewhat non-negotiable. I find it, very important to surround myself, and I suggest that folks to surround themselves, both professionally and personally, with healthy people. It will help keep them on track. And then there's a constant process of checking in, right? What worked 1 year is not going to work the next year. What worked 5 years ago is not going to be appropriate for what you need 5 years from now. So in the whole philosophy of an unexamined life is not worth living. Life should be, and it's appropriate to be challenging and stressful, but it also should be rewarding and a source of joy and happiness. And so checking in and making sure that you've got the right balance and that those priorities of feeling like you're successfully surmounting your challenges and taking on the right new tasks and learning that is resulting in products and processes that you ultimately have joy and happiness from. Those priorities need to be emergent.
Looking back, Soltage's success to date, has it been more reliant on what you and your company chose not to do, or on what it chose to do?
That's a great question. And we're 17 years in. We've deployed well over $1 billion, and we're operating across 25 states. And we would not have gotten here, particularly in our startup and venture capital mode, if we didn't focus on what we do and make that a very small sliver of the universe of potentials and say no to everything else. So it's really discipline in terms of what is in scope for this business. What do we need to be focusing on above all else to make this quarter successful? This year successful, and then leaving all else aside. As a business leader and for folks in the company, there will always be things pulling in 1,000 different directions. And so really having a crisp idea of what the business is supposed to do, where the business builds value and what leads to success, that sort of discipline and mentality that needs to inform each and every time allocation